Hi,
Hi there,
Stephen.
everyone. Welcome to eLearning Hot Seat. We're live right now. Suchi, how are you doing? Good morning
Good to see you.
Just so everybody knows, like, we're honest here at LMS Pulse. We're honest here at Open LMS. We were hoping, Suchi, we were wondering if you were going to show.
Never. No, this is something I'm very passionate about and very excited about. You can blame it on technology. So
Yeah, no, I figured there was a glitch there somewhere. And so, this is the beauty of technology. This is the beauty of this stuff. So, it's great to see you again. How are you?
Likewise. Thank you for having me again. I think, can you believe it's almost the end of 2021?
No, at the end of the day, it's November 10th, and Thanksgiving for people from the United States, it's right around the corner. Down here in Mexico, we just did Day of the Dead, and now it's like all the Christmas decorations are going up. It's craziness. I don't know. It's nuts.
The Halloween ones are coming down for sure. It makes me sad.
It's great. Like I want to first welcome everybody who's already here. Octaviano, I hope that I'm not butchering your name. I really appreciate you, just kind of giving a shout out that it's a great day for neurodiverse learners and practitioners. Thank you so much. And Mato Logis, assalamu alaikum to you as well from Pakistan. I really appreciate you dialing in and checking us out here on YouTube. So I'm here with Suchi Deshpande, who is the founder of an organization, a company called Learnfully. We had you on the eLearning podcast a few weeks ago, and people really were interested in this topic. It's a topic that is super timely and something that has become even more important as the pandemic has shown over the last 18, 20 months. And so I want to start out like this, because for people who haven't heard the podcast, for people who don't know who you are, Suchi, I'd love it for you. Like, give us the 1 minute on kind of who you are, what Learnfully is, and then we can kind of go into that background. And I just want to try, just because we're live, I'm hearing a sort of a big echo in the background. Are you hearing that as well?
I'm not hearing that, but it's possible because of the headphone situation.
Okay.
So let's see. I can try and fix it, or we can keep going. It's up to you.
Let's just roll for right now, and we'll see how we're going.
Okay. But I don't hear the echo, so I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
Yeah. We'll assume everybody else doesn't. If I'll appreciate if somebody who's listening out there on LinkedIn or Facebook or YouTube, you throw it in the comments if you are hearing an echo or it becomes an issue. Let us know, and we'll pause for a second and work it out. So over to you, Suchi.
Okay, great. So thanks for having me again. As I already mentioned, this topic is very near and dear to my heart. My name is Suchi. I'm a working mom. I have 2 boys who are neurodiverse, but basically they have ADHD and ASD. And so about 3 years ago, I myself got diagnosed with ADHD because I'm like, when my kids were diagnosed, I was like, this sounds awfully like me. So maybe I need to go, get this done. And I did. And it just made me realize that during the initial parts of the journey, when I was going through this, there's a lot of fears that are really unwarranted as a parent. Like, what if I give my kid this label? Like, should I do this? Should I do that? Like, how's society going to view us? And I can safely say that having been through that myself, seeing dozens of parents, hundreds actually, go through that themselves, that actually knowing how your brain works, understanding what that is really important in order for you to understand what your strengths and challenges are. Because when there's an unknown factor, in fact, I think I mentioned that 50% of the parents don't want to know if their kids have some kind of a learning difference because they'd rather be in the dark. But that actually only offsets the anxiety to the kids, who then don't understand why their peers are getting something and they're not. And so since then, I've become like a staunch advocate for the more you know, the better. Obviously, you need to still have that confidence and say, this is what I'm going to focus on and this is what I'm not going to focus on. But what we at Learnfully do as an organization is we do exactly that. It's like, we're not trying to change you. We're not trying to make you like your peer. we're in fact going to show you the best version of yourself and show the kids the best version of themselves and give them strategies to essentially, be able to advocate for themselves and read and learn and understand how to progress in life.
Well, neurodiversity is a pretty big word.
Yeah.
It can offset or maybe put off some people that, hey, this is a little too sophisticated for me, whatever. Like, give me what exactly does neurodiversity mean? Maybe, obviously you said ADHD. I'm not sure what ASI is. I'm going to be honest.
Yeah. Sorry.
So like maybe what is, for lack of a better term, what's the spectrum of neurodiversity? Like, can you give us a couple of different examples and, what's it look like?
That's exactly what it is. Everything's a spectrum. It's ASD, which is autism spectrum disorder, is a spectrum. Okay. ADHD is a spectrum. Dyslexia is a spectrum. And basically what it comes down to is that there's the frontal lobe of the brain, which has what you call which actually supports the executive functioning, which consists of about 7 strands. And this has nothing to do with IQ. This is essentially, how do you plan? How do you organize? What's your visual memory? What's your auditory memory? So essentially, that is very crucial and significant for learning. And that develops till you're 25. So the whole thing of going from kid to adulthood, if you especially have significant deficits, if you will, and like, your kid's really sloppy, or I mean, my kids are sloppy, or if, something, seems like something should be innate, but it's not. I think that is, anything can be on the spectrum. So neurodiversity is if you basically process information a little differently than the neurotypicals, if you will, or if you problem solve or even consume information a little differently. So what that means is, I'll give you an example. Like my son, when he was 5, the kindergarten teacher was like, I don't think he knows his ABCs. And I'm like, whoa, what does that mean? Because, we were really trying to, make sure that we were front loading him. But then we realized that he is just not a good auditory learner. So when she would give him instructions, because he wasn't getting the instructions in an auditory way, instead of saying, oh, let me try writing the instructions down, her assumption just went to, oh, he doesn't know his ABCs. So neurodiversity is exactly to help you kind of differentiate that. There's a difference between how they're consuming information versus do they know this or not. And today's society conflates those two. And so just because, you think differently or consume information differently, you mustn't assume that the person doesn't know the subject matter. So that's what neurodiversity essentially falls into the category of. The rest of them are just labels. ADHD, whatever it is, there's many different variations of it. Some people do get significantly impaired, and some people actually have a ton of strengths, but maybe a significant challenge in, say, social skills, right? And that, can really make or break them. That's why you see all these genius IQs who, probably are not CEOs of the company because they have like some significant challenge somewhere else. So that's essentially what it is, that we need to embrace how not only, we talk about diversity a lot, but that's the color of your skin. But there are people who think differently and act differently and can get shunned if you don't try and understand, where that motivation or information is coming from. So neurodiversity is just all about keep an open mind. We all think differently for a reason, and we're here to problem solve differently for a reason. So that was a little long-winded, but I hope that answered it.
No, that's fantastic. I want to remind everyone, if you are checking out this hot seat right now, we're live, obviously on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on YouTube. We do see your comments and we do see your questions, or we do, we'd love to hear your stories. We'd love to, if you do have specific questions, or if you'd like to just sort of contribute. That's the whole point of these sort of hot seats, is to just have a real conversation. If you're listening to the recording as well, throw your comments in as well. Suchi will see them, or I will see them on LinkedIn, and we can pass them around. We can also have them over in the eLearning community as well, so we can feed back to you and give you some answers as well. You juxtapose for me, I'm what I'm interested in sort of talking about right now is it sounds to me like it would be so easy for everyone to be neurodiverse, right? And I'm just, I've got 3 kids there, from primary to almost secondary, sort of high school level right now. Like, okay, and I think they're I would guess they're neurotypical, right? And yet, I know that my eldest son,
Yeah.
When we moved, for example, when we moved from online learning, which was the pandemic all last year, to in-person learning now, his response, his his grades have just gone straight through straight through his interact, all of that stuff. And I mean, as a parent, I'm just saying, hey, that's just kind of, he's a teenager and he needed to have social interaction. Whereas my middle son like loves being online and is like definitely more reticent in a social situation.
Yeah.
Like, at what point I'd like, maybe you could tell us a story from your journey. At what point do you raise your hand and say, hey, maybe we need to see some tests, or maybe we need to check this out?
Yeah. So at the point that you want to, as a parent or even as an adult, look at it is if you are having a significant issue in all environments. So what that means is, it's common for kids to be unorganized at school. I mean, at home, but then, be organized at school or, other places that they're really motivated in. But say if, they're just a mess everywhere and, at some point you just go, this is not normal, like even for, someone who's typical. And to the audience, I think, parents or those who are neurodiverse themselves will know what that means. That you just kind of go, okay, I get it. You don't want to pick up your clothes, but the fact that it's permeating everywhere and it's actually bringing you down in a way, you're holding yourself back, that is not normal. And so one example would be is, my kid has crippling anxiety, and believe it or not, that's a learning difference as well, because it just kind of, you're putting yourself in situations where you're just shutting down and holding yourself back. And, after a few years, we were like, okay, he's 2. Okay, he's 3. Okay, he's 4. Okay, he's 5 and he's never participated in a sport. What's going on? And so it's, you do kind of, as a parent, you do have that intuition. And you do kind of say, okay, this is not normal, because it's not like he's telling me, you know what, I just don't like all those other things, but I like this one thing. He's just like, I don't want to do any of that because it involves people. Then that is an anomaly. And that's when, you probably want to go and say, okay, what is the root cause of the issue here? And we discovered it's anxiety. It's that, that actually is really holding him back. And that's essentially when we, decided to roll with it. So that's just a small example, and a subtle example.
Fantastic. Okay, great. One question, and I don't know if this is putting you on the spot here or not, but Mato, I think it's Matho. He says, and I apologize, man or woman there, we'll just assume Mato. He's asking, can you please suggest some self-test of dyscalculia?
Oh, dyscalculia.
Dyscalculia. Oh, God. Thank you for the correct pronunciation there.
No worries. Look, I am a parent. I've become a self-taught expert on this, but I would say that I am happy to ask some experts and get back to you on that. But I would say that at this moment, I don't feel super comfortable recommending a single one of them, but I know tons of experts who can essentially answer that question, and I'll happily get back to you on that one.
Thanks. Yeah. Okay. So we'll come back to you. Speaking of experts, you have someone, you have people that you built Learnfully with, if I remember our conversation correctly. Tell us about some of that. Like, was this, how did that relationship get started? How did you put that on the table? And was it just sort of like an aha moment happened, or was this, something that no, you knew you needed to do this, build Learnfully from the beginning, or what?
So you will also hear a dog barking in the background, which I apologize for. I would say that it's a combination of the aha moment and also years of research, if you will, and living it, right? So basically, the way it essentially worked out is, it was a personal journey. When my son was 3, got diagnosed with ASD, which is autism spectrum disorder. So that's basically autism and Asperger's. They just kind of combined it and expanded it and call it a spectrum. And from that point on, so Stephen, I think you're frozen. I'm not sure if it's me or can everyone else hear me? Okay. All right. Okay, great. So
yeah, we're good to go.
Sorry, you were frozen for a second. I'm not sure if it was me. But yeah, so the whole thing is, we were talking about, sorry, what were we talking about again?
I was asking you about, we were looking at your co-founder or the people that you brought in to help build it. And you came at this from, I'm living this, but it's now presenting an opportunity. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So I was in what you call the enterprise software industry, and I was always like a techie in the sense that I'm a product manager, very comfortable dealing with technology. And what really frustrated me after my son got diagnosed is two things. One is the world is not made for him because they wanted to put him in either the severe bucket or the neurotypical bucket. Both of them were not a fit. And then the other was the system is very inefficient and almost archaic in terms of communication. It's almost like they want the parents to have a hard time. They want the parents to essentially, it's very fragmented. And the therapy or the solution is not. And so it's very hard for the parent to, have a day job and essentially kind of round all this up. And so as a result, 65% of the parents, especially moms, end up having a loss in income, when they have this kind of a diagnosis, which is totally unnecessary. And also as time went on, we of course had the drive and, the means. We're lucky enough to have that. And we said, this is not working for us. We need to find someone else who we trust and look for schools that support his programs. And when we found that, in a course of it's been 7 years now, but even after 6 months, he was a different kid. He was just changing for the better. And that's because we chose to focus on a strength and interest-based program that basically, versus let's work on your weaknesses for 20 hours a week. What a way to build your childhood, right? Let's try and, pick the skill that you're the worst at and only work on that, and you'll maybe
focus on that. Sure.
Yeah, exactly. So we were like, no, there's got to be a better way. And so when we did this, saw a huge change. And then as my friends' kids were growing up, typically when you're in that gray area, you kind of start falling through the cracks when you're going from learning to read to reading to learn. And so that's in the 2nd, 3rd grade. And that's when they started seeing the foundational issues. And that made us realize, oh, we're not alone. And then as the solution went on, I'm like, oh, this solution even works for, this is the scaffolding, which is interest and strength based. And so from that point on, it just had this itch, I want to make a difference. I know this is what's going to make a difference. So I went into working at an autism clinic and built out technology for them as the first product lead. It's called Appia. And now, they've raised their Series A with SoftBank. But then I knew it was going to be a 2-year gig. And I always focused on education because the numbers showed that 20% of the kids have some kind of a diagnosis. And that's only on paper. So look at the undiagnosed cases, right? And so this was a huge market. And on top of that, with COVID hitting, that only magnified the issue because now, parents were seeing both sides of it. They were like, oh, this is really working for my kid, or, hey, there's something off because how kids behave at schools and home are kind of different. And so when you're seeing that at home, you're like, okay, something, there's something different over here. So 72% of the parents now feel like, hey, my kid needs some extra support, as part of their learning process. And so with all this information in mind, there was a bunch of aha moments that happened over the course of, I want to say 5 years. I already knew who I wanted as my CEO for a very long time. She was someone that I worked with. Yeah, she was basically someone that I worked with. And then my head of education services was someone that I knew. Her name is Jess Corinne, who I knew would be, like the perfect fit. And what happened is, like, the three of us got together, and it was it was weird. It was almost like magic. We were like, yes, like we had our roles. We're very complementary. We all have the same passion, and we all have the same goal. We have a personal experience. And so things just took off from that point on. And I don't know, I think this is the first time where it feels like it's really easy. Like there's no there's no conflict. They're all in it for the right reason, which just tells you that, if you're in it for the right reason, like, this is the first time I'm feeling like it doesn't feel like a job. And so, it's very important to find that team. And I would say that maybe luck had something to do with it, but, I've also kept up with relationships over the years, and carefully, for 5 years I've been thinking about this company. So I've been picking, hey, who do I think I would want to work with in order to essentially grow this.
And how thank you so much, Suchi, and how embarrassing it is right now that it appears my internet connection down here in Mexico is having some stability issues. So I apologize for everyone if I keep popping in and out here. A question coming from Octaviano, and again, putting you kind of on the spot here, but it will be interesting to hear if you have this answer. He's asking, there's a lot of empirical evidence on synchronous virtual interactions pertaining to the neurodiverse community. Where do you see the need for more research? So to put that in English for everybody who is listening, like, so synchronous, real-time interactions, especially, this is the eLearning hot seat. So rather than having, giving lessons, asynchronously, where it's like, hey, look, watch a video, do an assignment, then, maybe we'll come back together in that synchronous format where it's real time, means that having that real-time interaction is more important to neurodiverse learners. Do you see places where there's more research?
Yeah, so it's interesting because synchronous or asynchronous learning, or even flipped learning, most of that really comes down to the learning profile of the kid. So essentially, like, how do they consume information? What's their level of anxiety or attitude towards learning? And also, how independent are they? Because often, synchronous learning is probably not the best for, folks who are very anxious in a classroom setting, or who, maybe who maybe need time to front load that information because their processing is not as high as some of the others. So in terms of where do I see the need for more research, honestly, I see the need for research I'm going to answer this a little differently. I see the need for research where you have a learning profile and you have different kinds of education methods, which is synchronous or asynchronous, or flip learning, or even the traditional learning, and see, based on the learning profile, where the learners are succeeding the best. And the reason it becomes a little more complex is because what we're trying to find out, I think the goal that I would like for us to do research on, is how do you get these kids to unlock their potential and essentially, get them going, right? And there's been research that shows that if you take a boring topic and put it in an auditory form, and there's a visual learner, it doesn't matter even if you put it in a visual form, they are not going to learn it. So a lot of it is actually strength and interest based that actually helps with the motivation. So when you combine that, and then you actually, the strength and interest, and combine that with the form of learning, which one is the most efficient way of learning? Like, I would really love to see something around that, and hopefully participate in one of those.
Fantastic. As Learnfully, this is a topic you've decided to make your own. Obviously, it's in your it was discovered because of your family events. Talk about stigmas around neurodiversity. You said that kind of at the beginning, if I'm a parent, if I'm a partner, a spouse, what are some things that, or some strategies that you've seen, or that you're using now, or that you teach and learn fully about, I don't want to say normalizing, but as much as much as saying, look, this is reality, and this doesn't mean we're less or
Yeah, no, I think I get the, sorry, there was a little bit of breaking up, but I get the gist of what you're saying. So in terms of how to, I know you said normalizing is not the word, but I think that that is essentially you want to go. So there's a difference. There's a difference between how you communicate with your own kids, like when do you tell them, right? Especially if you find out early. And then there's a difference of how do you tell others, like, around him. So in terms of stigmas, there are stereotypes that exist, like, oh, if you have autism, you're like Rain Man and you can count cards. If you're ADHD, you're bouncing off the walls like you just got out of Willy Wonka's factory. That's none of those. Those are true to a subset of that. But if you have autism, you can be the most social person on earth, but you could have other deficiencies that kind of define what autism is. And I think that in society, that stigma, that definition of what autistic looks like, or what ADHD looks like, or what dyslexia looks like, is not, there's a lack of awareness over there. So because of that, when parents essentially get this diagnosis, they're reluctant to share it right away because they themselves don't know what it is. We were not raised to say that if you have autistic kids, this is how you need to parent them, right? Like that's just not, that's just something you're not prepared for. And so dealing with society becomes hard in the first year. And what I would say is I've seen, again, hundreds of parents. And one thing I can say for certainty is that the journey that they have, it doesn't matter how severe or how gray the label is, that they essentially go through the same process. Is that for the first time, for the first phase, they're in denial. They're like, no, my kid just needs to work harder, because they're kind of pushing away from this label. And then when they realize that, okay, we've spent 6 months on this, now we need to go get a diagnosis. And then there's like a little bit of a mourning, sort of, it's like, because you don't know what this means. Like there is no roadmap that says, oh, if you do this in 6 months, they will be here. You just have to do what you think is the right thing to do, and then, see where the progress is happening. In fact, most of the experts will tell you that you kind of have to see how they're evolving. And
Sure.
That's their measurement of success over their lifetime. And so when you don't know what the next 6 months to a year are going to look like, that waiting period is painful for parents. And so that's when they kind of go into the shell and don't want to like really talk about it until they're comfortable. So, if you would have asked me 3 years ago, how do I get out of this 1 year thing? To be quite honest, I would have said that, no, just be brave, just be bold and do it. But that's just not the reality. I think everyone has to go through that journey. But the one thing I will say is that you are not alone, my friend. It's there. And I was like talking to a lot of parents, and they were like, oh, I thought I was special because I was going through this journey. I'm like, no, you are not special. You're not alone. Get out there, talk about your stuff. And then actually what you'll realize is that, oh, actually my situation's not that bad. Or, hey, actually that person was successful, so maybe I should go talk to them about it. So go find your tribe, go find your kind. And that essentially will help you get going in terms of, hey, how do you like talk to people, etc. Now, in terms of normalizing it, look, every family is different, but the one thing that they all say is everyone's brain just works a little differently. Okay. Even moms, even, my son was saying, he was like, I have ADHD. I'm like, dude, you have ADHD. I have ADHD. That guy over there has ADHD. We're all in this together. It's just a label. It just means you have strengths and you have weaknesses. You're really good at this. you need help in this. And essentially, when you have that conversation, it eases a lot of the anxiety. But I know that kids sometimes, especially when they find out that they have a diagnosis in 5th, 6th, or 7th grade, they're really concerned about being perceived as different than their peers. So, they kind of don't want to share it. And so if we kind of mourn with them, they're going to absorb that energy. So, so it's very important to say that this doesn't change you. This is who you are. This is where your strengths are. Like, believe it or not, people who have ADHD have the power to hyperfocus. So if they like something, they can get something done in an hour that maybe someone can get done in a day. It's nuts. And so it's very important as a parent to educate yourself on where the strengths are and where the norms are, and then essentially try and find a way to bring your child up, because they will be looking to you in order to kind of build up, that level of confidence. Find a therapist if you need to, for yourself or your kid, in order to try and have that conversation. But definitely don't, at least in front of them, don't mourn with them. If they're like, well, I'm worried about being different. And then I think having the conversation of, yeah, I know that's, it's okay to say, yeah, I know that's hard, but don't dismiss it. But, definitely like help them process it and move on. Like, show them the door. Don't sit with them in that darkness, like forever. For some time, it's fine, but then show them the door and say, but look at all this other stuff that you have. Don't just focus on this one thing. Look at all these good things you have that your friends don't have. And so that essentially is very, very important to have a conversation on.
I'm talking with Suchi Deshpande, who's the founder of an organization called Learnfully, which focuses on neurodiversity and creating strategies for families and children, and I don't know, maybe also adults, for understanding and then playing to strengths in order to work with that neurodiversity. If you have questions for us, we are live right now on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on YouTube. We do see your comments if you want to put them in the comments there. And obviously, if you're listening to this on the replay, you can comment still, and you will, we will be not only be able to see the comments, but we'll also be able to respond to them as well. I also want to just take this moment to invite everyone. Suchi is a member of our eLearning community as well. So if you go to there's a ticker at the bottom of the screen here that will show you the link to go to that eLearning community as well. Join us there. It's a community of thousands of eLearning professionals who are interested in this topic and many other topics as well. So come and join us over there. My next question for you, Suchi, is, as you are putting together these learning pathways that play to people, learning neurodiverse strengths and those sort of things, if I'm a parent listening, is this something that I can eventually, or my child can eventually graduate from? For instance, your children, will they eventually graduate from it? Or is this, once I get a diagnosis, that, that's it, like this is diabetes, that kind of thing? Or are there multiple answers there?
Again, I'm not the super expert, but from what I know of ADHD, what I know of autism, and what I know of dyslexia, there's definitely ways to alleviate it. And I think that there have been stories of, oh, my son no longer, or my daughter no longer tests on the spectrum, like as they grow up. But I don't think there's a cure for it. I think that you can alleviate it by using therapy, or, like there's this form of behavior therapy where, it's not innate, so let's make it a muscle memory. So, let's make sure that you're organized in this world, and it maybe just be organized in your schoolwork. So there's ways of targeting certain areas, especially where your challenges really hold you back. There's always medication, not for autism, but not for dyslexia, but especially for ADHD, which often is a comorbidity with dyslexia or even with autism. So, when the medication really helps, it significantly, like for my older kid who has ADHD and ASD, he really took off after the medication came in for ADHD. That's because he was now able to absorb his therapies better. He was able to retain those strategies better. So essentially that, really helped him, test more in the normal range in a lot of the areas that he wasn't testing in the normal range in. But does that mean he doesn't have autism? I'm like, no, I think he will, always be like a quirky, smart, nerdy kid who maybe is a little too blunt, but
Sure.
that's what autism may look like when you're an adult. So do you outgrow it? I'm like, yeah, maybe you're not receiving therapy anymore, but I think those traits still stay with you. Your brain is wired the way it is. You can alleviate it, but I don't really see, well, I could be wrong, and I'm happy to be wrong, obviously, as a parent, but I don't know if there's a cure for it. And yeah.
Okay. What about gender differences, or I'm just kind of sort of thinking girl boy, especially in the primary and secondary years. Tell me about that, different approaches. Are we seeing different numbers or percentages of diagnoses? Is it more likely to be diagnosed as a boy or a girl? Different stigmas, those kinds of things. Like, just talk to me about that.
Yeah, actually, well, up until recently, it was common knowledge that boys generally have if you're a boy, you have a higher chance of having autism or ADHD versus a girl. But now research is starting to show that no, the symptoms just present differently in girls. So ADHD essentially is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, but I was not hyperactive, and actually I was talking to a lot of parents and they're like, oh yeah, my daughter has, but she's not hyperactive. So it's not ADHD, but we're like, no, but all the other symptoms are clearly showing that. So even society has it wrong in terms of what ADHD or ADD means. And girls actually, because they get underdiagnosed, they tend to go more into a shell because as society, it's less acceptable for a girl to not be social, or to be like a little quirky, rather than, like a boy who's like, oh, he's just being a boy. Like he's just, bouncing off the walls. But for girls, it presents a little differently. They tend to mask it a little differently. And so, so I think we're essentially learning that now girls are severely underdiagnosed compared to boys because the symptoms are a little different.
And following on that, if I remember from the podcast interview, there is some sort of ginormous number. You were, if I remember correctly, you were quoting either a survey or research that was done recently about the number of people that are affected by this, at least in the United States. Can you remind me what that was?
Yeah, I think the official numbers are that I think there was something about the adult, in terms of adult, like how many of them are undiagnosed, right? So I think the number is, again, this is just an approximation, but I think about people who are incarcerated, 75% of them have an undiagnosed or diagnosed learning difference. Which really tells you that how important it is to society in order to help understand this. 20% of them are diagnosed. 50% of parents don't want to know if there's a diagnosis. And there is like a 40 or 50% case, and I can't recall exactly what the pool is, but there's a decent amount of undiagnosed adults who essentially kind of have learned to live with it or struggle, with the fact that they have this learning difference and it was never addressed. Like basically they just don't end up living up to their potential, or some of them have found their way out by pure luck because they had a good mentor or, someone who really believed in them in order to essentially achieve that. So that I think is very important. And there is actually a comment on here, if you don't mind, that I'd like to address.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
From Mathologics, which says that, like students with math have math difficulty and are misunderstood and overlooked, which also affects their emotional health as well. And that is very true. Dyscalculia is, reading is a more common learning difference, if you will. And, math, and dyscalculia, like dyslexia for reading is what dyscalculia is for math. So numbers, you have a hard time with numbers, and you have a hard time with spatial, reasoning. Like, for example, I can be in a room and, people can go, oh yeah, that's 10 feet, that's 20 feet. And I'm like, I can tell you. I mean, I know approximately what it is, but I still struggle with right and left. So there's a lot of, nuances, and it becomes really hard for kids who don't have that awareness that, oh, I think I'm only struggling in math. And it affects them mentally because their peers are getting it and they're not. And so now it becomes this bigger issue of, it goes from I'm struggling in math to I can't do anything right. And so in order to essentially help with that, I really wish schools had tests that were not just skills based, meaning how much are you at grade level, not just that, but essentially we're able to see how you consume information, whether you know the subject matter or not, and what are your strengths and what are your challenges. And so that's what we do at Learnfully, where we have this assessment that can essentially tell you that, hey, it's a psychoeducational assessment that'll tell you that this is your learning profile and this is how we need to go about it. And recently I've spoken to kids who are like, yeah, I have, this kid was like in third grade. He's like, yeah, I have dyslexia, I have dyscalculia, I just do tutoring. It's like, it was just a casual conversation. And I'm like, that's refreshing. It's like someone's open about it. They're talking about it. And because I was talking about my son, and I was like, oh yeah, like, sometimes parents are even more sensitive. So I was like, yeah, my son has autism. So sometimes he can say some weird stuff. And he was like, oh yeah, I have dyscalculia, I have dyslexia. So yeah, no, fine, I get it. And so it was just really nice to see that. So it is very helpful for even their own mental being to understand, where they're at.
Speaking of assessments, take us through the Learnfully process. Like, what is it that Learnfully, I mean, I'll give you the platform to be something of a little bit of an advertisement for yourself. Like, what is it that Learnfully does, and why would it be important for me as a parent to consider that strategy?
Yeah, I will take this opportunity. So, the whole point of, starting Learnfully is we did not just want to be that problem finder. Like, it's not like about a report that you give to parents and say, yep, here's all the list of things.
You're screwed. There you go.
Pretty much. And also, we're not trying to diagnose you. We're not giving you a diagnosis. We're not, reducing this complex brain of your kids to one word. We're essentially telling you that, hey, this is the profile. This is the learning profile. This is how your kid learns. And the way the process starts is we measure for executive functioning, non-verbal, cognitive tests, which essentially means that look at these designs. Like, we don't want to rely on reading, but then we also have visual and auditory tests to see which medium you perform best in. And then, of course, we do have the skills test. I mean, you can't discount that, because the reason for that is because you want to see where the kid's at, and you want to understand the causation effect of why your kid is at that level, whether it's high or whether it's low. For example, kids on the spectrum tend to score really high, up until second grade, both in reading and in math, but it starts going down a little when the concepts start going from very literal to more
abstract,
like word problems and stuff like that. So that's where they start to go. So that's what we want to catch. It's like, are you going to have trouble with comprehension? And so that's the stuff that we really want to catch. And and even often, when parents come in, they say, my kid's really bad at math, but turns out he or she is just bad at word problems.
Right.
And so, or they have dyscalculia. So it's we just kind of want to figure out what the issue is. And then what we do is we recommend a program for the child based on their strengths and interests. And we essentially have our own community of therapists who are highly trained in multisensory methods, but they're also trained in the well-being of the child. And when I say train, they have degrees. It's not just like a 3-day training program that we put them through. They essentially understand that building a relationship with the kid is important, bringing their anxiety down is important, and helping them, kind of go through the process and, kind of be more fluid about it is very, very important. And so that is something that they're very skilled at. But the main thing about Learnfully that we really pride ourselves at is we're not just about the child. We're also about the family. And what we mean by that is it's not like, it's not like we have weekly family meetings or something, but we do essentially take great pride in letting the parents know, communicating with them and letting them know that this is where your kid is, this is where they're going to be, these are the realistic goals, and keep them in the loop in simple terms. And the reason, again, that's important is because every parent is going to ask, when is my kid going to graduate out of this? When are they going to start reading at 4th grade level? And it is our job to ease that anxiety and say, these are the steps. This is the progress he or she's making. You can reach out to us and ask us any questions you want. Because it's a very anxious process for parents themselves. It's a huge deal because imagine you're a parent and someone's been telling you your kid's behind a few years, you've lost a few years because you were kind of messing around or futzing around, and now all of a sudden you're putting your trust in this organization that is supposed to move them ahead without knowing how your kid's going to move ahead.
Sure, absolutely.
So it's a very anxiety-driven situation, and so we really have a high retention because we essentially want to focus on what works for you as a family and bring some sense of peace over there.
Fantastic. How does this, this is the eLearning hot seat. Does this all happen online? It sounds to me like so many of this types of neurodiversity would require face-to-face interaction, or that kind of human, and sort of we're in the same room. Yes. There's nonverbal energy, etc. Talk to me about that.
Yeah. So what I spoke to you about was the human aspect, right? And sometimes when I talk about the tech, eyes kind of glaze over, but this is where I get most excited. Because
you do come from the tech world, I mean, after all.
I know, nerd. But it's but the tech part, which essentially is very important, is in the sense that it's how we solve the problem. So we are trying to build out. We're actively building out an algorithm to essentially say that if we understand the learning profile of the child and their goals, then we can predict how quickly they can essentially reach their goals. And that is something that's not been done. And that's something that parents really want. But today, even in terms of technology, what we're really looking into is the caregiver experience. How do you, and this sounds, it's not trivial, the scheduling piece, the payment piece. And then the other thing is we digitize all our reports. So everything is done online. It can be done in person, but our therapists are trained to use our internal tools where you're taking both qualitative and quantitative data. So the roadmap that you have, the progress that you see is something that we are recording in the back and showing you a graph of this is where your kid was last week, this is where they are today. I mean, typically there isn't a significant difference in a week, but what we're also really trying to record is, what's the mood of the kid today? And does that affect their performance? And so we are collecting a lot of data to essentially solve for what Octaviano mentioned, which is there enough research? And that's where we want to do research. Is when are they going to be at their best? And what are the factors that inhibit a kid? And that varies and based on the learning profile. And that's essentially what we really want to crack the nut on.
Fantastic. Suchi Deshpande, you are the CEO and founder of Learnfully.
Oh, I am the CPO.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm the Chief Product Officer. I am the co-founder of Learnfully. Letha McLaren is the CEO of Learnfully. She was someone who was my boss 12, 13 years ago, is still my boss now. It's just, it's just someone that I've always wanted to start a company with. And so the second this idea came, she was the first person I ran to, and unfortunately, it didn't take much convincing.
And I apologize for putting the wrong C in your title there, but this has been a great conversation. One of the things I love about it is, we talk a lot about accessibility. We talk a lot about neurodiversity. We talk about one of the things that we've learned over the last 18 months in the pandemic are these pieces. And it's really interesting when a lens or a filter such as, hey, everybody's got to be online, it brings out these pieces that have been, I don't want to say lurking, but they've been in the background the whole time. But now we can, really give them the time and attention that they deserve. And I'm really, I really appreciate you and Learnfully for, bringing strategies forward for, helping parents and helping people to solve this problem. Thank you so much for your time today. Again, reminder to everybody, if you do, if you do have a question for Suchi, you can still throw it in the comments in YouTube, in Facebook, or in LinkedIn. We will receive them. But then you can also come just join us over at the eLearning community. Just look at the ticker at the bottom of the screen there. It'll show you how to get in there. It's a free community. It's filled with thousands of eLearning professionals who are interested in this and many other topics. Come and ask a question. Suchi's a part of it as well, and we'll get you taken care of. Thank you once again, Suchi.
Thank you for having me. This was great.
All right. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. You too. All right. Bye.
Super cool.